I want you to understand how important it is that I wanted to be here. Because you all represent our faith. You represent our church. And the commitment that you're making to be here, all of you, those who are still sleeping in, as well as those of you who made it here for breakfast, is so important for the present and future of our church. Because you are the leadership. You are, today. It's not the generation ahead of you. It's not the generation that's 60 years ahead of you. You need to understand is you need to take ownership of your church, of our church, and not be afraid of stepping into leadership positions today. Because if you don't, there won't be anything for you down the road, and there won't be anything for your children. And I mean that sincerely, and that's the reason why I'm here today and not laying in bed with ice on my neck. Okay? Not that I necessarily have anything valuable to offer. But, hold on one second. As I just clicked out of my presentation. So, I'm going to talk about movies today. How many of you like movies? Not a whole lot, just kind of a couple. Do you realize it's the 25th anniversary of The Princess Bride this year? How many of you like The Princess Bride? Come on, I mean, there's no way any hand should not be going up, okay? 25th anniversary of a great, great, great movie. So, what I want to talk to you about today is about pop culture, is about media, and the importance that media plays in our spiritual growth. Is that crazy or what? That's kind of cool. Well, I want to ask you a quick question, if I can actually find the slide. It's going to have to do with St. Basil the Great. So I want to ask you, what's the difference between sacred and secular? What's the difference? Okay, I went around to most tables and I got in your face. Now I expect a little response. So come on. What's the difference between something that's sacred and something that's secular? Did you graduate college? Did you go to high school?
Sacred is churchy and secular is not.
Sacred is churchy. That's a great definition, and churchy is not. How many of you have an additional? Yeah, Stephen.
One that's oriented towards God and one that's oriented away from God.
Okay, towards God and away from God, like a compass, right? You have an orientation. Any other definition? Churchy, not churchy, towards God, away from God. God neutral. Well, that's an interesting perspective. Why?
It's because it doesn't really have an opinion either way. It just says, let's keep it separate, like, no God in the public sphere.
That's interesting. Anybody else? Sacred and secular.
Secular reminds me of worldly things.
As opposed to otherworldly.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Here we go. So there's almost a separation, right? That one kind, would you say, from what I'm hearing, one doesn't really have a whole lot to do with the other? Yes, no, maybe so? How many of you say yes? Raising your hand is safe. No? Raise your hand. Don't know? Raise your hand.
How about maybe?
Maybe. All right. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little rollback of the clock to the 4th century, to this guy, St. Basil, who was a saint, obviously, church father, and one of the really greatest saints of our church, because that's why he's called St. Basil the Great. And he wrote this book that has the worst title you can imagine, called The Address to Young Men on the Right Use of Greek Literature. Isn't that great? And there was a reason why he wrote that, is because people in the 4th century were asking the question, is it okay to read Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato now that Christ came? Is it okay to read secular pagan stuff as we're growing up our children in light of the Christian gospel? What do you think he said? Yeah? Why do you say yes? There's a right use of Greek literature. Because you're Greek? Because it's on the screen. Wow, that was good. That was good. All right. And he used an image in that text, because you're right. And the analogy that he used was of the honeybee. What does a honeybee do?
It makes honey.
It makes honey and it pollinates. Does a honeybee go to every flower?
Not all flowers.
The honeybee chooses which flowers it goes to and only takes the best. So the analogy St. Basil said is there are kernels of truth in ancient Greek literature. And just because Aristotle, Plato, Socrates were not necessarily Christians, there are kernels of divine truth in what they wrote. And we need to be like the honeybee as we live our daily lives to be able to pull those things that are good and important, but leave behind those things that aren't necessarily going to be beneficial, make the best honey. So I think that's a very interesting insight in just living life in general. Is take the best, see what's out there, but leave behind the things that don't matter. So I think today's movies are kind of like Greek literature, right? Plato, Aristotle, plus Star Wars. But I think that there's a certain analogy here because, you're talking about entertainment. You're talking about living life in context. And if we start to look at life in sort of this sacred and secular dualistic terms, you can't necessarily live life appropriately. You can't live life in life, can you? So, name some superheroes. Batman. Superman. Spider-Man. Who else? Wonder Woman. Catwoman. She's kind of like, Iron Man. Captain Caveman. Hanna-Barbera. Saturday mornings. Right? So you all know superheroes. Well, what do superheroes have in common? Superpowers. What else?
Tights.
Yes, tights. Okay, that's a good one.
They all have a flaw.
They have a flaw. In what way?
They always have some weakness. Like Superman's weakness is purpose.
Uh-huh. There's something they need to overcome. That's a great answer. Anything else? What else do superheroes have in common?
They fight to save lives.
Yes. They have an arch nemesis sometimes. All great. You had no idea we were going to talk about comic book heroes, did you, coming into this?
They have alter ego, I guess, like a different personality. They have to hide their true superhero-ness.
Yep. So there's a secret identity. How is their secret identity related to their real identity? Or their superhero identity?
Sometimes like they might camouflage in different like costumes and like people won't notice that that's the same person.
Right. Is that the way we should act as Christians? Should we have a sort of a work identity, a party identity, a Sunday identity? Interesting. So, I think superheroes have something that's important. I'm calling it a superhero event. Because you're all right with everything you said, including the tights. That was a good answer. And the superhero event is different for every superhero, but it's a moment of epiphany. So with Batman, whom you mentioned, Batman, when he's a child in the comics, he witnesses his parents get killed in front of him. They're murdered. And after that, he swears to protect the innocent. And Batman never uses guns. He refuses to use his guns because the gun was what killed his parents. There's an event, and there's a transformation to a different identity. Iron Man. How many of you saw the Iron Man movie? Okay. So I want to play a clip of the Iron Man movie where here we have Tony Stark. Okay, Robert Downey Jr., so all the girls are going to go, right? And he's just come back from Afghanistan, and what's happened? Why has he come back from Afghanistan? Do you remember? Anyone? What's that? He was kidnapped. He comes back from Afghanistan, and the moment is that he saw people being killed using the same weapons that he designed to protect people. His superhero event. Yep.
Hey, would it be all right if everyone sat down? Why don't you just sit down? That way you can see me and a little less formal than. I never got to say goodbye to Dad. I never got to say goodbye to my father. There's questions that I would ask him. I would ask him how he felt about what this company did. If he was conflicted, if he ever had doubts. Or maybe he was every interesting man we all remember from the newspress. I saw young Americans killed by the very weapons I created to defend them and protect them. And I saw that I had become part of a system that is comfortable with zero accountability. I have my eyes open. I came to realize that I have more to offer this world than just making things to blow up. And that is why, effective immediately, I am shutting down the weapons manufacturing business until such a time as I can decide what the future of this company will be, what direction it should take, one that I'm comfortable with, and is consistent with the highest good for this country of love.
So Iron Man, Tony Stark, designs weapons, sees innocent people being killed, and it causes him to question the morality of what he was doing. How is that sort of like us with the way we interact with life in general? We're thrown into situations. And do we often take the time to sit back and see what we're involved in? Is it right? Is it proper? Is it good? What are the consequences of some of the things that we do? I mean, here he's talking about owning a whole company, and what it means is undoing his entire lifestyle. And yet he saw the value of doing that, of making that choice and that difference, that superhero moment, that superhero event. So I think, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, that superheroes in general embark on a two-part journey. Number one is there is a lifelong journey to self-discovery, okay? And it's to overcome their character flaws, as someone said, to battle their temptations and to deal with their shortcomings. So part of what it means to be a superhero is to transform self. And I think that's also part of what it means to be a Christian, too. The second part, I think, is to embark on a journey to save others, to change the world for the better. But you have to overcome those character flaws first to a certain degree before you can even go about helping someone else. There's no way that Tony Stark becomes Iron Man in the movie or in the comics unless he's had that event where he realizes the flaws that are there present in the company, in his focus, in his direction, in his life, that helps him to then go and try to focus on others. And that reminds me of a saint, Saint Seraphim of Sarov, who said, "Acquire a peaceful spirit, and around you thousands will be saved." Meaning, save yourself, and then go about saving others. Focus on yourself and your own spiritual growth, then worry about others. How can you pretend to be something and yet really be a hypocrite? It doesn't work, does it? So I want to talk about two events in the life of the church, two biblical parables. First is the prodigal son. What's the parable of the prodigal son? Anyone remember? I hope.
David's inheritance.
And can you tell me a couple of additional details? Because you're mentioning about some people. How many are there in the parable? What's the family? You mentioned a brother. Okay, so does that mean there's another brother?
Yeah.
How many are there? 6?
I don't know. I only remember 2 brothers and their father.
Bingo. So there's 3 in the story. And we have an older brother, younger brother, and the father. And the younger brother wants his inheritance early. So it's like saying, Dad, I want you to give me all the money that you owe me, and instead of waiting until you're dead, I want you to give it to me now. Give it to me now, because I can't wait until you're dead for you to give me what I am owed. And the father doesn't fight it. To say, grow up, get a life, be responsible. Gives it to him. And what does he do? He doesn't go out and invest it. Doesn't go out to help his family. He spends it on himself, selfishly. And then after it's all gone, he comes to his senses. Does anyone remember where he comes to his senses? In a pig's trough, in a pig's farm, in a pig's place where he's feeding pigs. Now tell me, is that a place that has marble floors where you're feeding pigs? What is that like? Probably. What's the image we have of pigs? Where do they roll around in? In the mud, in the hay, in the dirt. So he's feeding pigs in a junky area, dirty himself, and he comes to his senses saying, gee, my father's servants have it better than I do. So why don't I go back and ask to be a servant? Selfish still, right? Still thinking about himself. But he somehow comes to his senses. And then, as he's on his way home, probably with nothing, dirty clothes that he has from being in the mud, his father sees him from a distance. Doesn't wait for the son to come, but runs up and what? Embraces him. And then he commands his servants, put a ring on his finger, symbol of authority. Kill the fatted calf, as you said. Let's throw a party for my son who was dead is alive. He's here. But the parable doesn't end there logically. Rather, the oldest son refuses to join in celebration. And the father goes out to see the eldest son. And the eldest son bitterly says, you never did anything like that for me. I'm the one who stayed here. I'm the one who worked all these years while that son of yours, not my brother, that son of yours went out and squandered everything. And the father says, my son, everything I have is yours. Everything. But we celebrate today because your brother was dead and is now alive. So even though that eldest son was in the house of the father all those years or whatever it was, he never became like the father. He never realized love. He never realized true repentance and what that meant. So it's a story not necessarily about the prodigal son, but a story about 2 brothers and the love of the father. It's a very, very powerful story that I think is something that has implications for all of us. But I think it's also something about Thor. Right? How many of you saw Thor? Come on, raise your hands high. Great movie, isn't it? Great flick. Well, tell me a little bit about Thor. How many main characters do we have? Anyone remember? Rhoda? Or was that a...
I watched this on the plane to or from Greece.
Okay. I'll give you a hint. 3. We got 3 main... That was great. And do you know their names?
Thor.
Uh-huh.
Loki.
Loki. See, you're still in Greek mode with Loki. Okay. Yeah, so we have Odin, the father, and then we have 2 brothers. Wow, that's kind of weird, isn't it? We have an older brother and we have a younger brother. And do we have a brother who's sort of a hothead and somebody who sort of wants an inheritance? Do you remember? Thor. And what does Thor want? What is Thor getting at the beginning of the movie? You don't remember. He's going to become king. He's getting his father's inheritance. It's all there for him, even though he's the oldest brother. So, Thor has this symbol of power, if you will. That is a gift that his father gave him, the hammer. And that's going to play a role in a sec for those of you who haven't seen the movie. And Thor is going to become king. So, in the beginning of the movie, there's this elaborate ceremony. Odin is about to give him the scepter, and then suddenly there's an invasion that happens. There's an invasion of giants, of basically snow monsters, if you will, called frost giants, from another world. And they invade Asgard, where Thor and Odin and Loki live. And Thor wants revenge. They ruined my day. They ruined my day when I was going to become king. Need to teach them a lesson. Because if they don't respect me now, they're not going to respect me later. So he disobeys his father, and he goes to the other world, to where the frost giants are, and he wreaks havoc. And one of his comrades is almost mortally wounded. They're overwhelmed, and Odin has to come and rescue them. And Thor's angry. And what we find out later in the movie, that it was actually Loki, his brother, who let the frost giants in to sort of ruin the day for his brother. So where we are now, and I want to show you a little clip, is when Odin, Loki, and Thor return to Asgard, there's a moment. There's a moment where Thor has to go before his father with his brother there. And I want you to look at the exchange.
Why did you bring us back?
Realize what you've done, what you've started.
I was protecting my home.
You have a means to protect your friends. How can you hope to protect the kingdom? Get to the healing room. No!
There won't be a kingdom to protect if you're afraid to act. The Jotuns must learn to fear me, just as they once feared you.
That's pride and vanity talking, not leadership. You've forgotten everything I taught you. But a warrior's patience.
While you wait and be patient. The 9 realms laugh at us. The old ways are done. You stand giving speeches while Asgard falls.
You're a vain, greedy, cruel boy.
And you are an old man and a fool.
Yes. I was poor. To think you were ready.
Father.
Thor, Odin's son, you have betrayed the express command of your king. Through your arrogance and stupidity, you've opened these peaceful realms and innocent lives to the horror and desolation of war. You are unworthy of these realms. You're unworthy of your title. You're unworthy of the loved ones you have betrayed. I now take from you your power. In the name of my father. His father before. I own it, our father. Whosoever holds this hammer, if it be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor.
What happened? He got grounded to earth, didn't he? But tell me what happened, in your own words. I bet you never thought about Thor as the prodigal son before, did you? But honestly, tell me what happened. What's the exchange like between, would you talk to your parents like that?
No, never.
Why?
Because we're insulting them, and that's against Catholicism and not respect who our parents are and how they raised us.
What else? What else do you learn from that exchange? It's a very powerful exchange, isn't it? It's a very hurtful exchange. But what is it that Odin, Thor's father, does? He sends... Yeah, go ahead, Jeannie. Dorothy.
He strips him of all his powers, saying that you're not worthy. Basically, like what I gave you, what my father gave before me, like how it says.
You're right. You're not worthy. You've been given all these things, but you've squandered them. You didn't realize the importance, the value, the responsibility. Right? That's pride and vanity talking, he specifically says. Well, when you're prideful and vain, you care about yourself, not about others. And that's not like St. Seraphim says, where take care of yourself first, and thousands around you will be saved. It's a focus of yourself, on yourself, at the expense of others. So Thor sends him to Earth to learn a lesson. To learn a lesson. So, the main characters in the scene are the three, like we have in the parable. Odin sends Thor to Earth, and then Loki is left behind, just like the older brother. And we know in the movie that Loki doesn't become like the father, just as in the parable. And Odin sends Thor's hammer down to Earth, but separately from Thor. And Thor doesn't immediately know that. Okay? So in the next scene, I want to show you, is I want you to see, now pretend you're in English class, and I don't care if you hated it or not, but I want you to pay attention to the details because it's really important. And here, Thor has found out where the hammer is. And he thinks that he can go and he can reclaim the power and authority that he once had by getting the hammer. And it's kind of like a King Arthur scene because the hammer is embedded in this mound of stone. Okay? So it's sent to Earth, it's lodged and surrounded by the U.S. government, and he breaks into the U.S. government camp to try to regain all of his power.
You better call it closer. I'm starting to root for this guy. Last chance.
Wait. I want to see this.
All right, shows up. Grab me, let's move in.
Pretty powerful scene. Again. Tell me about the weather. It's stormy. It's raining. Raining really hard. So what's that do to the ground? It's wet, muddy. Wet and muddy. So tell me, in literature, what's rain a symbol of? Water. Think your nuno and nuna. Cleansing. Baptism. In movies and literature, water scenes are baptismal scenes. They're moments of epiphany. They're moments of cleansing. They're moments of realization. Yeah, baptism is riddled throughout literature with that symbolism. And it's in movies too. So what you have here is you have a moment where Thor realizes that he's no longer entitled to the right of power. It's no longer his to take. And he can't because he's still not worthy. Because he hasn't achieved that moment of repentance. Not just saying I'm sorry, because he does that. But it's not enough just to say I'm sorry. It's about transforming himself into something more. Let me go through these. So it's interesting. Baptism, the moment of epiphany. We have the moment where he's in the mud and he realizes things. So now in the climactic scene in the movie, Thor's brother Loki has now become king. And what he's done is he now wants to take over everything and sends a destroyer to try to kill Thor and his friends.
We must return to Asgard. We have to stop Loki.
What about you?
Don't worry, my friends, I have a plan.
We need to fall back. Come on.
Wait. Take it.
Brother, whatever I have done to wrong you, whatever I have done to lead you to do this, I am truly sorry. But these people are innocent. Taking their lives will gain you nothing. So take mine and end this.
whosoever holds of this hammer, if it be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor.
Okay, cheesy scene, granted. But the point's well taken. It's not until Thor is willing to sacrifice his own life, to put himself in the back seat as opposed to the forefront, that he's finally worthy of everything that he was entitled to. The entitlement was never in question. But it's not until he can do that, until he can put himself second, put others ahead of himself, that he's really worthy to reclaim the hammer and to be Thor. And I think that's interesting, because as Orthodox Christians, we're entitled to quite a bit, aren't we? But yet Christ calls us to always be the servant leader, the ones who are willing to put others ahead of ourselves, to lead through service. Not that if you have a position or an office, it's your opportunity to tell others what to do, but rather that you should be the first one who's willing to do that which you would ask others to do. To be the example in the office, to be the example in school, so that when somebody sees you, they know there's something different about you. What is it that's different? And it should be centered in your faith. Not in a fluffy and soft and fake sort of way, because that's not real faith, but in a way that really is life transforming. Because I'm going to tell you outright, unless you encounter God in your life, you're going to be searching until the day you die for something, and something will be missing. And if we can talk about it in a cheesy way with comic books, then it's so much more applicable in real life. And I use media to bring that to your attention, to sort of put it in your face, because if you say, well, gee, what does it mean between sacred and secular? To sort of have these two things that initially seem different. They're not. Because you can baptize things just as St. Basil did with Greek literature, and find good and find truth and find things that are edifying. But you need the lens of faith. You need the eyes of faith to do that. You need a knowledge of scriptures, to read the scriptures daily in your life, because otherwise it's a closed book. How many of you read the Da Vinci Code or saw the movie The Da Vinci Code? Remember? Quite a bit. Raise your hands nice and high. It's okay. There's a scene in the beginning where Tom Hanks is playing the nice Harvard professor talking about symbols. Do you remember that scene by chance? And what he'll do is he'll zoom in on something, and you'll think it's a swastika, for example. But then when it zooms out, it's something from the Indian culture, or from the Chinese culture. Or it will be initially a cross, and then you'll see that it's something else. As people in general, we apply meaning to things. When we see something, we apply meaning to it. We interpret symbols. And I would ask you and challenge you with a simple question is, when someone sees you, what do you symbolize? Who are you? What do they see? Do they see a person that's honest? Do they see a person with integrity? Do they see a person of faith? Or do they see something that's the complete opposite? I want to jump ahead together for a second. And I want to talk briefly about the publican and the Pharisee, the second parable. And I want to show you in particular one specific scene from another movie. Spider-Man. One of my favorites. And if you've seen any of the Spider-Man trilogy, the old one, there's a black suit that is an alien life form. It's a parasite that tries to take over Spider-Man. Well, Spider-Man loves it because it gives him power. Incredible power. But the suit comes from another world, and it comes in a moment where he's alone with his girlfriend and there's nobody else, like a Garden of Eden scene. Okay? And it comes, that temptation from outside. So Spider-Man has a secret identity. He's Peter Parker. He's a kid who's got problems, got girlfriend problems, got school problems. But yet it's another event where his uncle is killed. That is the superhero event. And does anyone remember what his Uncle Ben said as a phrase that motivates Spider-Man? Nice and loud. With great power comes great responsibility. It's the best line in all of comic books, I'm telling you. And when Spider-Man's uncle dies, when Peter Parker's uncle dies, does he have his superpowers already? Do you remember? He does. And what is the moment that he regrets for the rest of his life? Do you remember? He has an opportunity to stop. He actually sees the robbery happen. The person being robbed he wants to get back at. And then he just goes. So the robber runs right by him. And they can't understand why he just didn't stick out his foot, stop the elevator, do something. He didn't take responsibility. Not my problem. Have a nice day. Then goes out and sees his uncle shot. He's angry. He wants revenge. And then when he finds the robber, he can't take it. And that's what causes him to go from using his superpowers for money, because he was wrestling and making a lot of money, to actually becoming a superhero, that moment of epiphany. So in Spider-Man 3, the suit symbolizes this power that Spider-Man has now assumed. And the suit is like life. Because I'll tell you something. Money is alluring, isn't it? What does our society give us for symbols and imagery? You got to look good. You got to feel good. You got to have a lot of money. You got to live in a big house. You have to have a nice car. You've got to boom, 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 boom. And if you don't, you are somehow a failure. And time after time after time after time, we know none of those things bring fulfillment. None of those things bring happiness. None of those things really mean anything. They're illusions. They're temptations that lead to nothing. And in the movie, even though Spider-Man 3 is not necessarily a great movie, there's a scene where the temptation, and I'm going to jump right to it, causes him to break up with the girl that he loves. Tries to make her jealous, tries to deliberately hurt her. And yet, that's not who he is. He chose something that looked sexy, that looked alluring, that looked like it was going to feed him, and it left him empty. So now, after Spider-Man is now alone, Peter Parker, I want you to watch this scene. And again, notice the details of what happens.